One desperate shout changed 2 lives forever. On a freezing winter night, a wounded former federal operative stumbled into a bus station with armed killers only seconds behind him. He had no weapon left, no partner to trust, and nowhere to run. Then his eyes met an ordinary woman. She wasn't a police officer, she wasn't a soldier, she wasn't even expecting company. She was simply on her way to visit her dying sister. But in one terrifying moment, the stranger grabbed her hand and whispered, "Mom, don't let them know we're strangers." That single lie pulled an innocent woman into a nightmare she never chose. Now every checkpoint, every passing police cruiser, and every unfamiliar face could expose them. One mistake would cost both of them their lives. Why would a battle-hardened man risk trusting a complete stranger? Why didn't she walk away when she still had the chance? And how did a woman who had already buried her own son find the strength to protect another? Tonight's story isn't just about survival. It's about how family can be born in a single heartbeat, and how one act of courage can change 2 broken lives forever. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? If stories about courage, sacrifice, and unexpected family touch your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Your support helps bring more unforgettable stories like this to life. Now, let's begin. The wind carried the bitter smell of rust through the empty streets of Youngstown as snow drifted across abandoned smokestacks beneath a sky that had forgotten the sun. Caleb Mercer had learned long ago that betrayal never sounded dramatic. It wasn't accompanied by thunder or screaming. Most of the time, it sounded like silence. The silence after a radio stopped answering. The silence after footsteps disappeared behind you. The silence when men you had trusted suddenly stopped firing at the enemy, because they had become the enemy. 3 hours earlier, Caleb had entered the abandoned Republic Steel complex with 5 members of a covert federal task force. Officially, the building had been deserted for years. Unofficially, intelligence suggested it had become the largest hidden transfer point for stolen military weapons moving across state lines. Missile guidance chips, night vision equipment, explosives, enough hardware to arm a private army. The mission had been simple: photograph the inventory, retrieve the encrypted hard drive hidden inside the warehouse office, leave without anyone knowing they had ever been there. Instead, every light inside the factory suddenly exploded to life. Floodlights blinded them. Machine guns erupted from the overhead catwalks. The ambush had been perfect. Someone had sold them out. Caleb still remembered the terrified look on Agent Miles Carter's face before the first burst of bullets cut him down. He remembered Nicole screaming his name somewhere inside the maze of steel beams. He remembered reaching for his radio. Only static. Then another voice, one he had never expected to hear. "Romano sends his regards." Those 4 words echoed louder than the gunfire. Vincent Romano. The name had haunted federal investigations for nearly a decade. No fingerprints, no recorded photographs, no witnesses who lived long enough to testify. Just whispers. A ghost who bought politicians, police captains, dock workers, truck companies, and anyone else whose loyalty had a price. Tonight, Caleb finally understood why Romano had never been caught. He had never needed to hide. He had simply owned the people looking for him. A concrete support pillar exploded beside Caleb, sending chunks of broken cement into his side. The pain was instant. A jagged piece of concrete buried itself beneath his ribs. Warm blood soaked through his jacket before he even hit the ground. Training took over. Pain later. Move now. He crawled beneath a collapsed conveyor belt while bullets shattered the steel around him. He could hear boots approaching. Someone laughed. "Leave him! He won't make it far!" Another voice answered. "The boss wants confirmation." Caleb forced himself deeper beneath twisted metal until the voices faded. He lay there for nearly 20 minutes, barely breathing. His gloved hand pressed against the wound. Too much blood, not fatal, yet. When the factory finally fell silent again, he crawled through a broken drainage tunnel and emerged behind rows of abandoned freight cars nearly half a mile away. Snow covered the ground. Every breath burned. His legs felt heavier with each step. Still alive, only because everyone inside believed he would die before sunrise. They had underestimated one thing. Caleb Mercer had survived places far worse than Youngstown. Years earlier, during overseas operations that officially never happened, he had crossed frozen mountains with broken bones. He had hidden underwater for nearly 6 minutes beneath enemy patrol boats. He had once walked 18 miles after taking shrapnel through his shoulder. Pain was familiar. Fear was useful. Panic was deadly. He refused to panic. Instead, he found an abandoned delivery van and forced open the driver's door. Inside lay an old city map. He spread it across the steering wheel. Hospital. Impossible. Romano would check emergency rooms first. Police station. Even worse, if Romano truly controlled local officers, walking inside would be no different than surrendering. Hotels. Too obvious. Train station. Every exit could already be watched. His eyes finally settled on one location. Youngstown Interstate Bus Terminal. The final overnight bus heading toward Pittsburgh departed in less than 40 minutes. If he missed it, he wouldn't see another sunrise. Caleb removed the encrypted hard drive from an inner pocket beneath his coat. Its black casing was cracked, but intact. Inside was everything: shipping routes, financial transfers, military inventory, names. If the information reached honest federal authorities outside Ohio, Romano's empire would finally begin to collapse. Which explained why every killer in the city was hunting one bleeding man. He shoved the drive back into his jacket and staggered into the darkness. Across town, Evelyn Brooks carefully locked the door of her tiny apartment. At 58, she moved slower than she used to, though years of cleaning hospital corridors before dawn had kept her stronger than most women her age. She checked her handbag 3 times. Bus ticket, medicine, reading glasses, a knitted scarf she planned to give her younger sister Margaret. Margaret's latest letter had been painfully short. "The doctors say it has spread." No complaints, no fear, just those 5 words. Evelyn hadn't slept properly since reading them. She had promised herself she would be there before Christmas, no matter what. She wrapped her old wool coat tighter and stepped into the freezing night. The bus station was only a 15-minute walk away. She never noticed the blood droplets frozen into the snow several blocks ahead, nor the man leaning against a brick wall, barely able to remain standing. Caleb's vision blurred as the terminal lights finally appeared across the street. Relief lasted only a second. Then he saw them. 3 men pretending to smoke beside the entrance. Another reading a newspaper that had remained on the same page for 10 minutes. 2 uniformed officers casually watching every passenger entering the building. Not police, hunters. Romano had already surrounded the station. Anyone traveling alone was being quietly questioned before boarding. Caleb lowered his head beneath his hood. His heartbeat slowed instead of racing. Think, adapt, survive. Then, through the falling snow, he saw an older woman walking toward the terminal alone, clutching a worn leather handbag against her chest. She looked tired, kind, completely unaware that she was about to cross paths with the most dangerous night of her life. Caleb pushed himself away from the wall. Ignoring the fire tearing through his side, he disappeared into the narrow alley she was about to pass. Evelyn barely had time to register the movement before a gloved hand gently, but firmly, guided her into the narrow alley between two brick buildings. She gasped. Her handbag slipped from her shoulder and struck the icy pavement. When she looked up, she expected to see a mugger. Instead, she saw a man who looked as though he had already died once, and somehow kept walking. Snow clung to the shoulders of his dark jacket. His face was pale beneath a hood soaked with melting ice. Blood streamed from beneath one arm, dripping steadily onto the frozen ground. Most unsettling of all were his eyes. Not wild, not cruel, just exhausted. "I'm not going to hurt you," he whispered, struggling to stay on his feet. Evelyn instinctively stepped backward. "You stay away from me!" "I wish I could." His breathing became ragged. "But if you scream, they'll kill both of us." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" He glanced toward the street. The silhouettes of armed men moved beneath the station lights. "They're waiting for me." "Who?" "I don't have time." His knees suddenly buckled. He caught himself against the wall, leaving a smear of blood across the old bricks. Evelyn stared at the crimson stain. Her first instinct was still to run. Years of working overnight shifts at St. Catherine Medical Center had taught her one simple rule: never become involved. People brought trouble. Trouble destroyed lives. She had already buried one son. She had no strength left for another tragedy. Then she looked again. The wound wasn't superficial. A jagged piece of broken concrete remained lodged beneath the man's ribs. His jacket was soaked through. Every heartbeat forced more blood into the snow. This wasn't the injury of someone attacking people. It was the injury of someone who had barely escaped being murdered. "You should be in a hospital," she said quietly. A faint, bitter smile crossed Caleb's face. "They're waiting there." "The police?" He nodded once. "Some of them." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city seemed strangely silent despite the traffic only a block away. Evelyn searched his face for deception. She had spent 32 years cleaning emergency rooms after shootings, overdoses, domestic violence, and accidents. She had learned something about fear. Guilty people usually feared getting caught. Innocent people feared dying before anyone believed them. The man standing before her carried the second kind of fear. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked. Caleb swallowed hard. It was the hardest sentence he had spoken in years. "I need you to pretend you're my mother." Evelyn blinked. "My what?" "My mother." The words sounded absurd even to him. "You'll walk beside me. You'll yell at me. You'll tell everyone I'm your stubborn son who drank too much." She stared as though he had lost his mind. "No, I can't. I don't even know your name. My name doesn't matter. It does to me." He hesitated. "Caleb." She repeated it quietly. "Caleb." The name lingered in the cold air. For one impossible second, another face appeared in her memory. Daniel, her own son, 26 years old, laughing as he shoveled snow outside their first little house. The memory shattered almost instantly. Daniel lying motionless in a hospital room after an overdose, machines silent, Christmas music playing somewhere in the hallway. She forced herself back to the present. "You need someone else." "There isn't anyone else." His voice cracked. "They're stopping everyone traveling alone. If I walk in by myself, they'll know." He reached slowly inside his coat. Evelyn stiffened. Instead of a weapon, he pulled out a cracked federal identification wallet stained with blood. The photograph matched the man before her. The badge was genuine, or had been. She looked from the badge back to his face. "What happened to you?" "I trusted the wrong people." The answer carried far more weight than its 7 words. She believed him, not because of the badge, not because of the blood, but because she recognized the loneliness in his eyes. It was the same loneliness she had carried home every evening since Daniel died. A person who had lost everything eventually stopped asking for miracles. They only asked for one more chance. Caleb wasn't asking her to save him. He was asking her to walk beside him. Evelyn closed her eyes. "Lord, please don't let me regret this." When she opened them again, something inside her had changed. She bent down, picked up her handbag, then wrapped one arm around Caleb's waist. He flinched as pain shot through his side. "Lean on me," she said. "You'll fall if you don't." For the first time that night, Caleb allowed someone else to carry part of his weight. Together, they stepped toward the mouth of the alley. The bright lights of the terminal reflected off fresh snow. Voices echoed from the entrance. One of Romano's men laughed while lighting another cigarette. Another questioned an elderly traveler standing alone, exactly as Caleb had feared. Evelyn inhaled deeply. Then, without warning, she slapped Caleb hard across the shoulder. Not enough to reopen the wound, just enough to make him stumble. "I told you to stop drinking," she shouted loud enough for half the street to hear. "You embarrass me every single Christmas." Caleb immediately understood. He lowered his head. "I'm sorry, Mom." "Sorry doesn't pay your bills." "You think your father would be proud of this?" She grabbed the front of his coat and practically dragged him toward the entrance. People turned to watch. Some smiled awkwardly. Others shook their heads. To every stranger nearby, they looked exactly like a frustrated mother bringing home her irresponsible son. The act was perfect, perhaps too perfect. One of the men near the entrance frowned. He watched Caleb's slow walk. His eyes drifted toward the blood hidden beneath the coat, then toward the hood covering most of Caleb's face. He nudged another guard. "Hold it!" The second man turned. Both began walking toward them. Caleb felt Evelyn's grip tighten around his arm. Neither spoke, neither dared look away. The taller guard stopped only a few feet in front of them. His expression hardened. "I don't remember seeing your son come in with you." Evelyn answered before Caleb could breathe. "That's because he wandered off to feel sorry for himself." The guard wasn't convinced. He stepped closer, much closer. Then, without another word, he slowly reached out his hand toward Caleb's hood. The guard's fingers were only inches from Caleb's hood when Evelyn exploded. The sound of the slap echoed across the bus terminal. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't staged. Her palm struck Caleb's cheek with enough force to turn his head sideways. "You are 40 years old!" she shouted, her voice trembling with anger that felt frighteningly real. 40! And you're still making me clean up your messes!" Every conversation near the terminal came to a stop. Passengers turned. Even the armed men looked surprised. Caleb staggered, not because of the slap, but because he understood something in that instant. She wasn't acting anymore. She was remembering. "You promised me," Evelyn continued, grabbing his coat with both hands. "You promised after rehab. You promised after your brother's funeral. How many lies does one mother have to listen to before she finally gives up?" "I'm sorry," Caleb murmured, lowering his eyes. "Don't you dare call me Mom unless you mean it." The taller guard exchanged an uncomfortable glance with the man beside him. He had expected fear. He had expected nervous excuses. Instead, he was watching something painfully ordinary. A tired mother, a broken son. The younger guard smirked. "Looks like somebody had too much to drink." Evelyn turned toward him before Caleb could answer. "You think this is funny?" she snapped. "You want him? Take him!" She shoved Caleb forward so abruptly he nearly fell onto the icy sidewalk. "I'm tired of dragging him out of bars. I'm tired of paying his bills. I'm tired of believing every promise." Her voice cracked on the final sentence. "I'm just tired." For a brief moment, genuine silence settled over the entrance. The older guard scratched his chin. He looked Caleb up and down again. The blood beneath the coat was almost invisible now, hidden by darkness and layers of thick winter clothing. The swollen cheek, the unfocused eyes, the slouched posture. Everything matched the picture Evelyn had painted. Not a hunted federal operative, just another alcoholic son who had disappointed his mother for the 100th time. The guard stepped aside with obvious disgust. "Get him on the bus before he throws up." Evelyn let out an exhausted sigh. "I've been trying for 30 years. She wrapped Caleb's arm over her shoulders again. This time, no one stopped them. As they climbed the bus steps, Caleb heard one of Romano's men laugh behind them. "Poor old lady. She deserves better." The words stung more than either of them expected. The Greyhound bus smelled of diesel fuel, wet coats, and stale coffee. Most passengers had already settled into silence. A young couple shared headphones near the front. An elderly veteran slept against the window. A truck driver snored softly halfway down the aisle. No one paid attention to the older woman struggling to help her son into the last row. Exactly what Caleb had hoped. The farther from curious eyes, the better. The bus doors hissed shut. Outside, snow continued falling beneath the yellow station lights. Then the engine roared to life. Only after the terminal disappeared into the darkness did Caleb allow himself to breathe. He closed his eyes. "We made it." His voice barely carried above the engine. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She simply stared through the frosted window until the city lights began fading behind them. Finally, she spoke. "You almost got us both killed. I know. You lied to me. I know. You dragged me into something I don't understand. I know." For the first time since they met, Caleb looked directly at her. "I'm sorry." The apology wasn't automatic. It wasn't tactical. It was genuine. Evelyn studied his face for several long seconds. Then, unexpectedly, she nodded once. "So am I." Caleb frowned. "For what?" "For believing your eyes." He looked confused. She continued quietly. "Your eyes reminded me of someone." She reached into her handbag and removed a worn photograph. The edges had softened with time. A young man stood beside an old pickup truck, smiling beneath a bright July sky. He couldn't have been older than 26. He was my son. Caleb accepted the photograph carefully. "He looks happy." He was. "What happened?" Evelyn folded her hands together. For a while, she watched the snow beyond the glass instead of looking at Caleb. "Pain pills after a construction accident. The prescription stopped. The pain didn't. So someone offered him fentanyl." Her voice remained calm, too calm. "He said it was temporary. He said he could quit any time." "He lied." Caleb lowered his gaze. "I've seen that story before. I lived it." Evelyn gave a faint smile without happiness. "I spent years yelling at him. I begged, I threatened, I cried. I even stopped answering his phone calls because I thought maybe he'd finally learn." Her fingers tightened around the photograph. "The night he died," she swallowed hard, "the last thing I ever said to him was, 'Don't come home until you're sober.'" Silence settled between them. The engine hummed steadily beneath the floor. Snowflakes drifted past the windows like tiny ghosts. Evelyn slowly wiped one tear before it could fall. "So, when I slapped you," she looked down at her own hand, I wasn't pretending anymore. I was talking to Daniel. Caleb didn't know what to say. Years of tactical training had prepared him for gunfights, interrogations, hostage rescues, and surveillance operations. Nothing had prepared him for sitting beside a grieving mother whose pain had never truly ended. He handed the photograph back without speaking. Sometimes, silence carried more respect than words. Outside, the lights of Youngstown disappeared completely into the winter night. For the first time in years, neither of them realized they no longer felt entirely alone. Neither of them spoke again for nearly 20 minutes. The steady hum of the bus engine blended with the sound of tires cutting through fresh snow. Outside, abandoned factories gave way to frozen farmland, their outlines fading beneath the winter night. Caleb's breathing became slower. Too slow. Evelyn noticed the change immediately. Years of cleaning emergency rooms had taught her to recognize the difference between someone resting and someone slipping into shock. She looked down. Fresh blood had soaked through his coat, far more than before. "Caleb!" He opened one eye. "What?" "You're still bleeding." "I know." "No, you don't." She carefully pulled his coat aside. The makeshift bandage he'd wrapped around himself inside the steel mill had completely loosened. The piece of broken concrete was still buried beneath his ribs. Every bump in the road forced another stream of blood around it. "If we don't stop this, you'll bleed to death before Pittsburgh." He managed a weak smile. "I've had worse." "No. You've survived worse." "That's different." Without waiting for permission, Evelyn opened her handbag. Inside were supplies she always carried after years at the hospital: clean gauze, medical tape, disposable gloves, a small trauma bandage. Not enough for surgery, enough to buy time. She slipped on the gloves. "This is going to hurt." Caleb gave a dry laugh. "I was beginning to miss pain." She peeled back the soaked dressing. Even she inhaled sharply. The wound was deeper than she'd imagined. Concrete dust mixed with blood around the jagged fragment lodged beneath his ribs. "You can't remove it," Caleb warned. "I know. If you pull it out—" "I said I know." Her voice carried quiet authority. Instead of removing the fragment, she folded fresh gauze around it, pressing firmly to slow the bleeding without disturbing the object. Caleb clenched his jaw. His fingers dug into the seat until his knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at him to pull away. Instead, he stayed perfectly still. When she finally secured the bandage, his breathing steadied. For now. She sat back. "That should hold until morning." "If we make it to morning." Caleb looked toward the dark highway. "We will." She studied him for a long moment. "You still haven't told me who those men are." He remained silent. She continued. "If I'm risking my life, I deserve the truth." Caleb closed his eyes. For years, secrecy had been his profession. Names were never spoken. Operations were never discussed. Trust was earned slowly. But tonight, the woman beside him had already crossed a line from which there was no safe return. "They're not after money." He spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "They're after what's in my jacket." "The hard drive?" He nodded. "It contains shipping records." "For what?" "Military weapons." She frowned. "Stolen?" "Worse. Sold. To anyone willing to pay." She stared at him. Who would do something like that? People with enough money, enough influence, and no conscience. He reached carefully inside his coat and briefly showed her the cracked black drive before hiding it again. Everything is on this. Names, bank transfers, police officers, politicians. The men hunting me aren't protecting one criminal. They're protecting an entire system. And the man behind it? Caleb looked out the window. Vincent Romano. I've spent 6 years trying to prove he exists. Tonight, I finally did. Evelyn slowly understood. So you're not running because you're guilty? I'm running because I'm the last witness. Caleb nodded. The rest of my team is dead. The words hung heavily between them. I'm sorry. So am I. He looked down at his blood-stained hands. I keep wondering if I missed something. A warning. A clue. Someone I should have trusted less. You trusted people because that's what decent people do. Evelyn answered softly. The betrayal belongs to them. Not you. Before Caleb could respond, the bus suddenly slowed. The driver lifted the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be stopping briefly for a security inspection before crossing the Ohio River. A murmur spread through the passengers. Security inspection? At this hour? Caleb's pulse immediately quickened. He looked through the windshield. Flashing floodlights illuminated the massive bridge ahead. Concrete barriers blocked every lane. Several black SUVs waited beside military-style transport trucks. Men wearing tactical gear stood in organized positions. Not local police, not highway patrol, professionals. Caleb's expression hardened. They found us. Evelyn followed his gaze. The uniforms were clean, movements disciplined. Every rifle was carried exactly the same way. Military? Former military, Caleb whispered. Private contractors. The expensive kind. The bus rolled to a complete stop. Outside, one of the armed men spoke briefly with the driver before the doors opened. 6 operators climbed aboard. No shouting, no panic, just cold efficiency. Each carried a powerful flashlight. The team divided instantly. 3 began checking the front rows. 3 started from the rear. Passenger by passenger, face by face. No identification, no questions, only observation. One operator paused beside the sleeping veteran. Another examined a teenage couple. The beams of white light moved steadily closer. Caleb lowered his head. Evelyn quietly reached for his hand beneath the seat. This time, neither of them pretended. Her fingers squeezed his gently, as if reminding him he wasn't facing this alone anymore. The footsteps stopped only 1 row away. The team leader raised his flashlight. Its bright beam climbed slowly from Caleb's boots to his blood-stained sleeve, to the swollen bruise on his cheek, and finally to his face. The man's expression changed. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply stared. Then he reached into his vest and slowly unfolded a printed photograph. He compared it with Caleb's face once, then again. His eyes narrowed. I know you, he said quietly. I've seen this face before. The flashlight lingered on Caleb's face just long enough to make his heartbeat stop. The former soldier holding it narrowed his eyes. I know you, he repeated. I've seen this face before. Caleb remained perfectly still. Running was impossible. Fighting 6 trained contractors inside a crowded bus would get innocent people killed. For the first time that night, survival depended entirely on someone else. Before he could speak, Evelyn let out a weary sigh loud enough for half the passengers to hear. Oh, for heaven's sake, she rolled her eyes dramatically. I'd recognize this face too if I'd spent half my career dragging drunks out of bars. The contractor looked at her. She folded her arms. You know what else you've probably seen? What? A son who keeps disappointing his mother. Several passengers quietly chuckled. Even the driver glanced into the rearview mirror. Evelyn wasn't finished. You military boys all think every tired man with a bruise is some dangerous fugitive. She jabbed a finger toward Caleb. This idiot got drunk yesterday, slipped on my apartment stairs and smashed himself into the railing." She turned back toward Caleb before he could react. "And if your father were still alive, he'd be ashamed of you." Caleb lowered his eyes exactly like a child being scolded. "I'm sorry. You've said that for 10 years. The contractor looked from one to the other. The bruise on Caleb's cheek matched the slap. His exhausted posture matched the story. Most importantly, no hunted operative would willingly sit through that kind of humiliation without resisting. The man slowly folded the photograph and slipped it back into his vest. "My mistake," Evelyn snorted. "You think?" The contractor gave a short nod. "Sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am." "I've had worse inconveniences." He stepped aside. The inspection team continued toward the front of the bus. Only after the last pair of boots disappeared through the door did Caleb finally release the breath he had been holding. The engine started again. The bridge disappeared behind them. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Caleb whispered, "You saved my life." Evelyn kept looking out the window. "No, I embarrassed you. There's a difference." The eastern horizon was beginning to fade from black to deep blue when the Pittsburgh skyline finally appeared. Snow rested on rooftops and bridges stretching across the rivers like quiet blankets. The city looked peaceful, almost ordinary. Caleb envied the people waking up inside warm apartments, unaware that only a few hundred miles away, an entire federal task force had been erased before midnight. The bus rolled into the downtown terminal just before dawn. Passengers quietly collected their luggage. The young couple hurried toward a taxi. The truck driver stretched his back. The elderly veteran tipped his cap toward Evelyn before disappearing into the cold morning. Caleb remained seated. Every movement sent pain through his side. Evelyn noticed immediately. "Can you stand?" "I'll have to." She slipped beneath his arm again. Together they stepped onto the platform. The freezing air hit Caleb's face like needles. He scanned every rooftop, every parked vehicle, every security camera. Old habits never slept. "You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder," Evelyn said. "I do." "Why?" "Because the people chasing me don't stop when the sun comes up." She hesitated. "The hospital is only 6 blocks away." "No." "You need surgery." "No." "You could die." He looked directly at her. "If I walk into any emergency room before Romano is exposed, I'll die there." She frowned. "You still think hospitals are compromised?" "I don't think." "I know." He spoke with absolute certainty. "My team had 3 emergency evacuation locations. Only 5 people knew them. When I arrived at the first, there were already armed men waiting. The second? The same. The third? They killed 2 paramedics before I even reached the parking lot." Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. How could they know? Someone inside kept telling them. He looked toward the hospital rising in the distance. If Romano can buy judges, he can buy doctors. If he can buy doctors, he can buy hospital administrators. And if he can buy administrators, he can read patient admissions before the nurses do. Silence settled between them. Evelyn slowly realized how completely alone Caleb truly was. No police, no hospitals, no hotels, no government offices. Every place ordinary people trusted had become a trap. "So where will you go?" Caleb looked around the unfamiliar streets. "I'll disappear. You can barely walk." "I've survived worse." "You've said that twice already." He smiled weakly. "It keeps being true." She studied him carefully. The stubbornness, the exhaustion, the blood seeping through another fresh layer of gauze. Then she remembered Daniel. Her son had worn that same expression every time he insisted he didn't need help. She had believed him once. She had buried him because of it. Not again. "No," Caleb blinked. "What?" "You're coming with me." "I can't. You don't get a vote." "Evelyn." "My apartment is small. The furniture is old. The coffee tastes terrible. But nobody knows you. And nobody will look for a federal witness inside an old widow's apartment." He hesitated. "I'd put you in danger." She gave him a tired smile. "I've been in danger since the moment you called me Mom." She adjusted his arm across her shoulder once more. "Now stop arguing. We have a long walk home." For the first time in many years, Caleb Mercer allowed someone to lead him, instead of planning the next escape himself. Together they disappeared into the quiet streets of Pittsburgh, unaware that somewhere behind them, another pair of eyes had already begun following their footprints through the fresh snow. Evelyn's apartment occupied the second floor of a weathered brick building tucked between an old bakery and a shuttered tailor shop on Pittsburgh's north side. It wasn't much. A narrow hallway, a tiny kitchen with faded yellow cabinets, a living room where every piece of furniture had clearly survived another decade. But to Caleb, it felt like the safest place on earth. The moment the apartment door locked behind them, his body finally surrendered. His legs gave out. He collapsed onto the worn sofa before Evelyn could stop him. She hurried toward the bedroom and returned carrying an old green metal first aid case. Caleb recognized it immediately. "Army surplus?" "My late husband. He served in Vietnam. He kept everything." She knelt beside him. "I'm going to remove the concrete." Caleb nodded once. "If I pass out, you'll wake up. If I don't, you will." Her tone left no room for argument. She boiled water, sterilized a pair of forceps over the stove, then soaked them in rubbing alcohol. Hospital rules, old habits, steady hands. Years spent cleaning operating rooms had taught her more than surgeons ever realized. She had watched thousands of procedures. Tonight, she prayed she remembered enough. Caleb removed his jacket with obvious difficulty. The wound looked worse under proper light. The concrete fragment had shifted deeper. Dark bruising spread across his ribs. Evelyn swallowed. "This is going to hurt. I've been told." She cut away the remaining fabric around the wound. "On 3. There won't be a 3. Before Caleb could react, she firmly gripped the fragment with the forceps. One swift pull. Agony exploded through his body. His back arched violently. A strangled cry escaped before he could stop it. Blood followed the jagged piece of concrete as it dropped into the metal tray with a dull clink. Evelyn immediately packed the wound with sterile gauze and pressed down hard. "Pressure. Keep breathing." Caleb's vision blurred. The room tilted. For a moment he wasn't inside a warm apartment anymore. He was back inside the abandoned steel mill. Gunfire echoed between rusted beams. Miles Carter fell first. Nicole reached for him. "No!" Caleb shouted. "Nicole, get down!" His hands searched wildly through empty air. "They're above us! Move!" Evelyn gently caught his wrists. "Caleb." He couldn't hear her. "Jackson! Cover the east door! Don't leave me!" Tears filled Evelyn's eyes. These weren't the nightmares of a criminal. These were the memories of a man who had watched friends die, one by one. She placed a cool cloth across his forehead. "They're gone. You're safe. No one's shooting now." Slowly, his breathing settled. The panic faded. At last he drifted into an exhausted sleep. Nearly 4 hours passed. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains. Evelyn remained seated beside the sofa with a book she never actually read. Every few minutes she checked the bandage. No fresh bleeding. His color had improved. When Caleb finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was a steaming cup of coffee waiting on the table. "You stayed." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure you'd wake up." "I wasn't either." He slowly sat upright. Every muscle protested. Still alive. Good enough. He reached inside his damaged coat and removed the rugged black encrypted drive. The casing had survived. He connected it to an aging desktop computer Evelyn rarely used except to write emails. The hard drive powered on. A login screen appeared, then another. Military-grade encryption. Caleb frowned. "That's impossible." "What?" "This isn't our system." Someone had altered the security protocols. Every directory demanded a new authentication key. Every file remained locked. The evidence that had cost so many lives had become nothing more than unreadable code. No. He tried another password, then another. Nothing. Frustration built inside him. Whoever betrayed the task force hadn't simply exposed the operation. They had anticipated its failure. They had encrypted the evidence before Caleb ever recovered it. His fist struck the desk. "Damn it!" The drive slid sideways. Something caught Evelyn's eye. "Wait!" She pointed toward a small crack along the bottom edge of the casing. "That wasn't there before." Caleb examined it. Using a pocket knife, he carefully pried open the damaged corner. Hidden beneath a thin layer of protective foam lay something unexpected. A folded piece of yellow paper, no larger than a business card. He unfolded it carefully. Only one line had been handwritten. St. Matthew's Church, Blackwater Road, Mercer County, West Virginia. Nothing else. No explanation, no signature, no coordinates. Just an abandoned church hundreds of miles away. Caleb stared at the note, then understanding slowly crossed his face. "Miles," Evelyn looked up. "My partner. He must have hidden this before the ambush. You think it's another clue?" "I think," Caleb whispered, "he knew the hard drive might never be opened. Someone had planned a backup, somewhere inside an abandoned church. Hope returned for the first time since the steel mill. Very briefly. Then the apartment doorbell rang. Once. Caleb froze. Neither of them had told anyone they were here. The bell rang again. 3 slow presses. Evelyn quietly stood. She looked through the peephole. A clean-cut man wearing a dark overcoat held up a leather badge wallet. His voice carried calmly through the closed door. "Mrs. Brooks? My name is Special Agent Richard Sloan. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with Caleb Mercer." Caleb's eyes met Evelyn's. Neither of them moved, because both understood the same terrifying truth. The real FBI should never have known where to find him. The man outside the apartment held his badge with practiced confidence. "Mrs. Brooks," he called through the door. "We know Caleb Mercer is inside. He's in protective federal custody now. Open the door and no one gets hurt." Caleb didn't move. Instead, he quietly walked toward the peephole beside Evelyn. He never looked through it. He looked at the shadow beneath the door. One pair of polished shoes stood directly in front. Another shadow shifted farther to the left. A third crossed the hallway window for less than a second. Too many men, too carefully positioned. His eyes narrowed. "They're not FBI." Evelyn whispered, "How can you tell? Real agents would never announce my name through a hallway." He slowly backed away from the entrance. If they believed I was alive, they'd assume anyone listening could be Romano's people. The only men careless enough to do that already know who they're working for. As if confirming his suspicion, a quiet metallic click echoed from outside. Someone was attaching a breaching tool to the apartment door. Caleb's pulse remained steady. There isn't much time. Evelyn looked around the tiny apartment helplessly. We're trapped. No, she frowned. What do you mean? He pointed toward an old wooden door beside the kitchen pantry. What's behind that? She blinked in surprise. The basement. It connects to the old heating tunnels. My husband used to complain about them every winter. Can they reach another street? She hesitated. I think so. I've never gone very far. Good enough. Another loud bang struck the apartment door. A voice shouted, Federal agents, open immediately! Caleb almost smiled. They're getting impatient. Evelyn unlocked the basement door with trembling hands. A wave of damp, cold air rolled upward. The staircase creaked beneath their weight. Behind them, another violent impact rattled the apartment. Wood splintered. They're coming through. Caleb quietly closed the basement door behind them. Darkness swallowed the narrow staircase. Only Evelyn's small flashlight cut through the shadows. The basement smelled of old brick, rusted pipes, and forgotten decades. Boilers covered in dust lined one wall. Beyond them stretched a narrow maintenance tunnel barely tall enough to stand inside. My husband said these tunnels connected half the neighborhood before modern heating systems replaced them. Caleb nodded. Lead the way. They hurried through the tunnel as another crash echoed above. Someone had finally broken into the apartment. Voices spread through the rooms overhead. Search everything! He's still here! The flashlight beam trembled slightly inside Evelyn's hand. They'll find the basement. Eventually. What if these tunnels collapse? Then we'll find another way. She glanced sideways. You really believe that? I have to. Nearly 15 minutes later, a rusted metal hatch appeared at the end of the passage. Caleb pushed upward. Fresh winter air flooded inside. They emerged behind an abandoned warehouse nearly 3 blocks away. No police, no black SUVs, only silence. For now. By noon, they had traded buses twice, paid cash whenever possible, and avoided every highway patrol checkpoint. West Virginia welcomed them with winding mountain roads blanketed in snow. Neither of them spoke much during the journey. Caleb spent most of the drive studying the folded note Miles had hidden inside the hard drive. St. Matthew's Church, Blackwater Road. Why there? Why hide information hundreds of miles away from the original operation? Miles had never done anything without reason. If he had risked hiding the note, whatever waited inside that church had to be more valuable than the encrypted drive itself. Late that afternoon, they finally reached Blackwater Road. The abandoned church stood alone atop a wooded hill overlooking a forgotten cemetery. Its white paint had long since peeled away. Broken, stained glass windows rattled softly in the wind. The wooden cross leaned slightly to one side. Nature had almost reclaimed the building. It doesn't look like anyone's been here for years, Evelyn whispered. Caleb studied the untouched snow. No. Then he pointed downward. Someone has. A single set of footprints disappeared around the side of the church, not fresh, perhaps several days old, still visible. They entered carefully. Dust floated through pale afternoon sunlight. Collapsed pews covered the sanctuary. A Bible lay open beneath years of dirt. Nothing looked unusual, until Caleb noticed something beneath the old altar. The wooden floor sounded different, hollow. He knelt and brushed away layers of dust. A small iron ring appeared between 2 floorboards. He pulled. A hidden hatch slowly lifted. Cold air rushed upward from below. Stone steps disappeared into darkness. Evelyn looked at him. Miles? Caleb nodded. This has his fingerprints all over it. They descended carefully. The underground chambers stretched much farther than either expected. Metal shelving lined every wall. Waterproof storage crates stood stacked in perfect rows. Inside the first crate were hundreds of shipping manifests. The second contained bank ledgers. The third, photographs. Dozens of them. Military cargo, shipping containers, warehouse meetings, faces, names. Every page connected another piece of Romano's empire. Weapons moving through fake humanitarian shipments. Millions of dollars laundered through shell companies. Payments to judges, state senators, police captains, federal employees. Evelyn slowly lowered herself onto an old wooden chair. This could destroy all of them. Caleb opened another binder. Inside lay a printed list titled Authorized Recipients. Each name carried payment amounts beside it. Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. His eyes moved slowly down the page, then stopped. The air left his lungs. No. Evelyn looked up. What is it? Without speaking, Caleb turned the binder toward her. One name had been circled in red ink. Deputy Director Thomas Holbrook. Caleb felt the room spinning. Holbrook. The man who had recruited him into the task force. The mentor who had attended his wedding. The officer who had pinned every promotion onto his uniform. The man Caleb trusted more than anyone else inside the bureau. The betrayal hadn't started inside his team. It had started far above them. Every mission, every briefing, every safe house, every evacuation plan. Holbrook had known them all, which meant the ambush inside the steel mill had been planned long before Caleb ever stepped inside. Miles hadn't been trying to expose only Vincent Romano. He had been trying to expose the people who had built Romano into someone untouchable. And suddenly, footsteps echoed somewhere above the church. The footsteps above the sanctuary grew louder. Not one person, many, heavy boots, measured, disciplined. Caleb immediately switched off his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the underground archive. Evelyn barely dared to breathe. The wooden floor above them creaked. A man's voice echoed through the abandoned church. "I know you're here, Mercer." The voice was calm, almost amused. Caleb recognized it instantly, not from photographs, from surveillance recordings played during countless briefings. Vincent Romano. For years he had existed only as a shadow inside classified reports. Now that shadow stood only a few feet above his head. Romano laughed softly. "I've always admired loyal men. They're predictable. They always come back for their friends." Caleb slowly reached for his pistol. 3 rounds. That was all he had left. Another voice interrupted. "We searched the road." "The old woman came with him." "Good," Romano answered. "I'll need her alive." The words made Caleb's jaw tighten. Evelyn looked at him. He silently pointed toward another narrow tunnel extending deeper beneath the church. An emergency exit. Probably built decades earlier during the Cold War. Miles had thought of everything. Together, they quietly carried as many binders and storage drives as possible into 2 waterproof canvas bags. They had barely reached the tunnel entrance when the sound of splintering wood exploded overhead. Someone had discovered the hidden hatch. "Down here!" Flashlights flooded the staircase. Caleb grabbed Evelyn's hand. "Run!" They sprinted through the cramped tunnel. Behind them, armed men poured into the archive. Bullets slammed into stone walls. Dust exploded around them. The tunnel opened behind the church near the old cemetery. Snow covered hundreds of weathered gravestones. Leafless oak trees stretched dark branches across the fading afternoon sky. They had escaped. For perhaps 5 seconds, black SUVs suddenly emerged from both sides of the cemetery road. More armed men stepped out. Romano had surrounded the entire hill. "There! Don't let them leave!" Gunfire erupted. Caleb pushed Evelyn behind a marble monument as bullets shattered ancient headstones. Stone fragments sprayed across the snow. "We're trapped!" "No." Caleb looked toward the tree line. "If one of us reaches the woods, the evidence survives." Evelyn followed his gaze. Then something inside her settled. The same quiet certainty she had felt years earlier while sitting beside Daniel's hospital bed. A mother always made the same choice. She stood up before Caleb could stop her. "Evelyn!" She ignored him. Instead, she grabbed one of the heavy canvas bags. Then she ran in the opposite direction. "Hey!" she shouted at Romano's men. "You want the evidence? Come get it!" Half the gunmen instantly changed direction. "They're splitting! After the woman!" Exactly as she intended. Caleb stared in disbelief. She had made herself the target. No. Without thinking, he turned and fired 2 quick shots. Both struck the snow near pursuing gunmen, forcing them into cover. "Evelyn!" She disappeared between rows of gravestones with 6 armed men chasing her. Romano himself remained near the church entrance, watching, smiling. He expected Caleb to run. He expected survival instinct to win. Instead, Caleb dropped the remaining evidence bag beside a stone angel statue, then sprinted straight back toward the cemetery. 1 round left. That was enough. He reached the first pursuer and tackled him behind a granite monument. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the air. Caleb drove his elbow into the man's throat. The weapon fell free. He rolled, grabbed it, and opened fire. Controlled bursts. Years of tactical training returned instantly. 2 attackers dropped. Another retreated behind a crypt. "Evelyn!" "I'm here." Her voice came from behind an old family mausoleum. Still alive, thank God. Caleb fought his way toward her. Every step reopened the wound beneath his ribs. Blood soaked through the fresh bandages. Pain no longer mattered. Only distance, only reaching her. The final pursuer grabbed Evelyn by the coat before she could escape. He forced her against a weathered cross. "Move again, and she dies!" Caleb froze. The man stepped forward into clearer view. Expensive tactical gear, military posture. A silver ring engraved with the letter R. Recognition flashed through Caleb's mind. Marcus Doyle. Romano's chief enforcer, former Special Forces. The man intelligence reports called Romano's right hand. Romano himself slowly approached through the falling snow, hands in his overcoat pockets, almost relaxed. "I've spent 6 years looking for you, Mercer. And all along, you brought me exactly where I needed to go." His eyes shifted toward the evidence lying across the cemetery. "Thank you." Caleb lowered the rifle slightly. "You'll never leave here with those files." Romano smiled. "I don't need them. I already own everyone written inside." He looked toward Evelyn. "But you've become a very inconvenient mother." Marcus Doyle pressed his pistol harder against Evelyn's temple. Caleb's mind raced. 1 round, 1 chance, not enough. Then he noticed something. Doyle's attention wasn't on him anymore. He was watching Romano, waiting, like a soldier awaiting permission. Caleb suddenly understood. Romano trusted no one, not even his own lieutenant. That hesitation lasted less than a heartbeat. It was enough. Caleb threw the empty rifle directly at Romano. Every eye followed it instinctively. He lunged. His shoulders slammed into Doyle before the trigger could be pulled. The pistol fired harmlessly into the frozen ground. Evelyn fell free. Caleb and Doyle crashed through a row of weathered gravestones, wrestling violently across the snow. Punches, elbows, broken stone, blood. Neither man spoke. Both knew only one of them would stand. At last, Caleb trapped Doyle's arm beneath a cracked marble slab. The pistol slid out of reach. Doyle struggled violently. Caleb ripped a pair of plastic restraint ties from the tactical vest and cinched both wrists behind Doyle's back. The cemetery fell strangely silent. Romano had already disappeared. His remaining gunmen were retreating toward the waiting SUVs. Their leader had escaped, but not empty-handed. Caleb stood over the captured lieutenant, breathing hard. Marcus Doyle was alive, and for the first time in years, someone inside Romano's inner circle could finally talk. Snow continued falling over the cemetery long after Romano's convoy disappeared into the mountains. Caleb stood silently, breathing through the pain while watching the taillights vanish beyond the trees. He had failed to capture the man responsible for destroying so many lives, but he hadn't failed completely. Marcus Doyle knelt in the snow with his wrists secured behind his back. For the first time in nearly 10 years, someone from Vincent Romano's inner circle was alive, and that changed everything. 2 hours later, Caleb drove an aging pickup truck south through winding mountain roads. Marcus sat handcuffed in the back seat. Evelyn remained beside Caleb, quietly holding the waterproof evidence bags across her lap. Neither of them trusted local authorities anymore, not after discovering Deputy Director Thomas Holbrook's name inside Romano's financial records. Caleb couldn't risk contacting anyone inside Ohio. Or Pennsylvania. Too many names. Too many bought badges. Instead, he drove toward a small federal anti-corruption task force operating from an undisclosed office in Western Virginia. The unit answered directly to the Department of Justice in Washington, rather than local command structures. Only 3 people even knew it existed. If anyone remained clean, they would. The secure facility looked nothing like a government headquarters. No large flag, no polished marble, just an ordinary brick office hidden behind a state transportation building. Exactly the kind of place corrupt officials overlooked. When armed security officers surrounded the truck, Caleb slowly stepped out with both hands visible. "My name is Caleb Mercer. I need Director Allison Grant." One of the officers frowned. "She's expecting no visitors. Tell her Marcus Doyle is here." Everything changed. Within seconds, additional agents rushed outside, weapons raised, not toward Caleb, toward the prisoner. Marcus looked around and quietly laughed. "So, you actually found someone who isn't on Romano's payroll," Caleb answered without emotion. "Looks that way." Director Allison Grant spent nearly 6 straight hours reviewing the evidence. Shipping manifests, bank transfers, photographs, hidden ledgers, encrypted communication logs, the list of paid officials. Every page strengthened the next. No single document explained Romano's empire. Together, they explained everything. Grant slowly removed her glasses. "I've been chasing whispers for 15 years. She looked directly at Caleb. "You brought me proof." She then turned toward Marcus Doyle. "You have one chance." Marcus remained silent. Grant calmly slid one photograph across the table. It showed Romano speaking privately with Holbrook inside an airport hangar. Then another, a shipping container loaded with stolen missile components. Then another, a ledger listing payments made directly to Doyle himself. She folded her hands. "Romano already left you behind. He escaped. You're the only one sitting in this room." Marcus stared at the photographs for several long moments. The confidence he had carried inside the cemetery slowly disappeared. Finally, he spoke. "He'll kill my family." Grant answered quietly. "He already decided to." Silence. Marcus lowered his head. For years he had obeyed Romano without hesitation. He had believed loyalty guaranteed protection. Now he realized the truth. He had always been disposable. He closed his eyes. "I'll testify." Caleb looked at him carefully. Everything? Marcus nodded once. Everything. The investigation spread faster than anyone imagined. Search warrants were executed across 3 states before dawn. Federal tactical teams entered police departments, private warehouses, shipping companies, government offices. Bank records disappeared into evidence trucks. Computers were seized, hidden safes opened. Every hour brought another arrest. 43 people were taken into custody during the first 48 hours alone. Police captains, county commissioners, customs inspectors, weapons brokers, financial advisors, 2 state senators. Even Deputy Director Thomas Holbrook surrendered after realizing every financial transaction had already been traced. News channels called it the largest corruption investigation in the region's modern history. Caleb watched none of it. He remained inside protective custody while surgeons finally removed the remaining damaged tissue from his side. Evelyn visited every afternoon. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply watched snow fall outside the hospital window. Neither felt the need to fill every silence anymore. 3 months later, the trial finally began. Marcus Doyle became the prosecution's most devastating witness. He identified safe houses, secret accounts, political meetings, illegal weapons transfers. He described Romano's entire organization from the inside. For weeks, the courtroom listened in stunned silence. Then came the final day. Vincent Romano himself entered under heavy federal guard. For the first time, cameras captured the face that had haunted investigators for nearly a decade. No longer a ghost, just another aging man wearing prison chains. The jury deliberated less than 6 hours. Their verdict was unanimous. Guilty. Racketeering, domestic terrorism, weapons trafficking, conspiracy, multiple counts of murder. The judge imposed life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As Romano was escorted from the courtroom, he briefly turned toward Caleb. Their eyes met one final time. Romano smiled, not with victory, with disbelief. He still couldn't understand how everything he had built had collapsed. Because one frightened widow had chosen to help a bleeding stranger. Several weeks after the convictions, state officials organized a public ceremony honoring Evelyn Brooks. A substantial financial reward had been approved for her courage and assistance in dismantling Romano's organization. Reporters crowded the room. Television cameras waited. The presenter handed Evelyn an oversized ceremonial check. She looked at it quietly, then shook her head. "I can't accept this." The room fell silent. A reporter finally asked, "Mrs. Brooks, why?" Evelyn smiled gently. "I didn't save a witness." She glanced toward Caleb standing quietly in the back of the room. "I simply did what any mother should do." The applause lasted nearly a full minute. Evelyn stood quietly beneath the bright auditorium lights, still refusing to touch the ceremonial check. The governor himself stepped closer. "Mrs. Brooks," he said gently, "you've earned this." She smiled with the same quiet warmth Caleb had come to know over the past several months. "No, I've been given enough." The governor looked puzzled. "You risked your life. You deserve this recognition." Evelyn glanced across the room until her eyes found Caleb. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she answered softly, "When my son Daniel died, I thought God had closed every door in my heart. I spent 3 years believing I had failed as a mother. If I accept money for helping another child survive, it would feel like putting a price on something no mother should ever sell." Silence filled the room. No reporter wrote a word. No camera moved. Even the governor lowered his head respectfully. "I only did," Evelyn continued, "what any mother should have done. When she stepped away from the podium, Caleb was waiting near the exit. Neither of them spoke. Neither needed to. Months passed. Caleb officially resigned from federal service. After nearly 2 decades of undercover operations, violence, and funerals, he no longer recognized the life he had once believed he wanted. His resignation letter contained only one sentence. Some battles are won with weapons. The ones worth keeping are won by choosing peace. His supervisors tried to persuade him to stay. He politely declined. For the first time since he was 22 years old, he slept without keeping a pistol beside his bed. The reward money Caleb received for exposing Romano's organization was substantial, much larger than anything he had ever imagined. Friends suggested he buy a house. Others encouraged him to invest. Instead, he drove to a small brick office overlooking a public park in Pittsburgh. Above the entrance hung a newly installed wooden sign, the Daniel Brooks Recovery Foundation. Its mission was simple: help families fighting opioid addiction receive treatment before it was too late, scholarships for rehabilitation, emergency counseling, support groups for parents, transportation to treatment centers, everything Daniel had never received when his family desperately needed help. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Evelyn quietly cried as she looked at her son's name carved into polished oak. Caleb handed her the ceremonial scissors. "This belongs to you." She shook her head. "No. It belongs to every family still waiting for their child to come home." Together they cut the ribbon. For the first time in years, Daniel's name no longer represented only loss. It represented hope. Time moved gently after that. Every spring, Caleb repaired the fence around Evelyn's small garden. Every autumn, they baked Daniel's favorite apple pie using the faded recipe card Evelyn had nearly thrown away after his funeral. Every Christmas, Caleb insisted on carrying every heavy box from the basement, despite Evelyn reminding him she was still perfectly capable. Their conversations became ordinary: groceries, neighbors, weather, television. Sometimes they laughed over nothing at all. Those quiet moments became the greatest victories either of them had ever known. People in the neighborhood simply assumed they were family. Neither ever corrected them. One crisp October morning, exactly 3 years after the night they met, they drove together to Green Hills Memorial Cemetery. The maple trees had turned brilliant shades of red and gold. Caleb carried a bouquet of white lilies. Daniel Brooks's headstone stood beneath an old oak tree overlooking a peaceful hillside. Evelyn gently brushed away a few fallen leaves. Caleb knelt and placed the flowers at the base of the stone. For a long while, neither spoke. The wind whispered softly through the branches above them. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "I've rehearsed these words 100 times." Evelyn looked at him. "I never found the right moment." He smiled faintly. "Maybe there isn't one." He drew a slow breath. "Mom." The single word hung in the quiet morning air. No fear, no disguise, no desperate plan to survive. Just truth. Evelyn's eyes immediately filled with tears. She reached out and gently touched his cheek. "I knew," she whispered. I knew from the moment you apologized on that bus." Caleb laughed softly through moist eyes. "I wasn't pretending anymore." "Neither was I." She slipped her arm through his, just as she had on that freezing winter night. Only this time, neither of them needed the performance. As they turned to leave, Evelyn looked once more toward Daniel's grave. A peaceful smile crossed her face. "You know," she said quietly, "I spent years asking God why He took my son away." She paused, watching the first rays of sunlight spread across the cemetery. "I never received the answer I expected." She squeezed Caleb's arm. "Instead, He sent me another son. Not through blood, but through mercy." Caleb looked toward the rising sun warming the hillside. For the first time in many years, the weight he had carried inside his heart finally began to lift. He realized something no battlefield had ever taught him. Family is not always the people who share your name. Sometimes, family is the stranger who chooses to stand beside you when everyone else walks away. Together, mother and son walked slowly toward the waiting car beneath the golden morning light, leaving behind a grave filled with sorrow, and carrying forward a future built from courage, forgiveness, and love. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Sometimes we pray for miracles, expecting God to change our circumstances overnight, but often His greatest miracles arrive in a different way. Instead of changing the road beneath our feet, He places the right person beside us to help us keep walking. Caleb believed he had lost everyone worth trusting. Evelyn believed she had lost the only son she would ever hold close again. Neither of them was searching for a new family. Yet God had already written a different ending. One wounded man found a mother. One grieving woman found a son. And both discovered that family is not always created by blood. It is created by love, sacrifice, and the courage to stand beside someone when the rest of the world turns away. Perhaps that's true for our lives as well. Maybe you're carrying burdens no one else can see. Maybe you're worried about your health, your family, your finances, or you're simply exhausted from fighting battles that seem never-ending. Please don't give up. God is still working, even when everything feels silent. A closed door may actually be His protection. A delay may be His preparation. A painful season may become the testimony that inspires someone else tomorrow. Never underestimate what God can do with one act of kindness, one brave decision, or one compassionate heart. I'd also like to share something personal. I'm raising 2 children on my own, and life hasn't always been easy. There are days when the responsibilities feel overwhelming, when the bills pile up, and when I wonder how I'll make it through another week. But every single morning, I choose hope. Not because my life is perfect, not because every problem has disappeared, but because I believe God is never finished writing our story. As long as He gives us another sunrise, He gives us another opportunity to love more deeply, forgive more freely, help someone in need, and become the answer to another person's prayer. So if today's story touched your heart, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who may need a little hope today. You never know whose life could be changed by one simple act of kindness. I'd also love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what lesson did you take away from Caleb and Evelyn's journey? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. I read as many of your messages as I can, and your encouragement helps me continue creating stories that bring hope and inspiration to people around the world. If you enjoy stories about faith, courage, compassion, and the extraordinary goodness that still exists in ordinary people, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Your support means more than you know, and it truly helps me continue this journey. Before you leave, I'd like to pray for you. May God bless you and your family. May He fill your home with peace, your heart with hope, and your days with unexpected joy. May He strengthen you when you're tired, comfort you when you're hurting, guide you when you're uncertain, and remind you every single day that you are never walking alone. May His love surround you, His grace sustain you, and His light lead you toward a future filled with purpose, healing, and miracles. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until we meet again, take care of yourself, keep believing, keep loving, and never stop moving forward. May God bless you always.